Welcome back to Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago on CTV and Talk City 91.1 FM. We are going to talk about drug counterfeiting now. It is something that the Minister of Health has talked about in the recent past, and he said that, you know, this has been around for more than 40 years and it is something that we need to be concerned about. But he also said the ministry is doing all that it can to protect Trinidad and Tobago, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We have with us this morning Ms. Farida Mungal, who is the marketing officer at Kariri, and Mr. Jamil Rahman, who is a pharmaceutical consultant, to talk to us a little bit more about this. And Ms. Mungal, you are going to tell us about a conference that is coming up to tell people more about counterfeiting and drug counterfeiting.
All right. This week, Thursday, the 26th of April, Kariri is hosting a pharmaceutical counterfeiting conference at the Trinidad Hilton. Persons who should attend would be the regional health pharmacists, insurance companies, doctors, people with an interest in understanding and increasing awareness about drug counterfeiting and what they can do to protect themselves and identify ways for, you know, increase their purchasing behavior, what to buy, what not to buy. Not only that, if they are taking medication and it's not working, you know, it may be a red flag for something. So Kariri is hosting this conference because it's an area, the Kariri is set up by the government, the Republic of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago, and part of the testing that we do is pharmaceutical testing. We do the active ingredient testing. We are independent testing laboratory, and this is an area that we can support Trinidad in with testing.
Yeah, because this is a major concern.
Yes, it's a major concern, and what we need to correct from the start is the fact from fiction. Several speakers have gone on television and radio recently, and they have misguided the public into the definition of what are counterfeit drugs and what are not. For instance, a lot of misinformation has been said about generic drugs. The generic drugs are counterfeit drugs. Unregistered drugs are counterfeit drugs, right? And cheap drugs are not counterfeited. All those are wrong statements.
So what is a counterfeit drug?
Okay, according to the WHO, a counterfeit drug is something that's substandard, spurious, fake, or falsified. And the American FDA had added on another term to that, degraded, which means counterfeit drugs are also drugs which are expired, drugs which have been transported badly, and drugs which have been stored badly, because they are no longer the original drug. So all of those items are counterfeit. And the other thing is, counterfeit drugs haven't just been around for 30 years. In 1985, it's when the WHO jumped on the bandwagon because it started to make a huge impact on international commerce. But counterfeit drugs have been around, recorded, since about the 4th century BC. In fact, counterfeit drugs is said to be the second oldest profession.
So it is something that Kariri has to take a look at, because you can't have people taking the drugs that may not help them.
Right. Kariri is an independent testing laboratory, so I know that systems need to be in place for the relevant ministries and the regulatory bodies such as Chemistry, Food and Drug, or the Drug Inspectorate, and the Ministry of Health, who oversees those two divisions, to work on a system where samples can be pulled from the shelf and Kariri can support in the active ingredient testing. Yeah?
Yeah. Because the pharmaceutical company, according to the Minister of Health, they are being tested. The companies, they are going into the some of the pharmacies and, you know, pulling out some of the drugs, as you said, and testing it. And so far, 5 pharmacies have been recommended to be charged. So how do you think the Ministry of Health should approach this? Is this the right way?
Well, first of all, I'm not absolutely sure of the facts of that statement, because we don't know who the 5 pharmacies are. And right now, there are no testing facilities at Food and Drug. So how do you prove that the items seized are counterfeit?
And he did. I'm glad you mentioned that, because the minister did say that Kariri does some testing.
Yes, we do the active ingredient testing and the percentage purity verification of the raw materials used in the development of the pharmaceutical item. So those are the 2 areas that Kariri can support this initiative.
But you are saying that, you know, that a full line of testing may not necessarily take place.
It's not taking place. The minister himself said that They have not even gutted out the Food and Drug building at the top of Frederick Street, which is the organization responsible for drug testing in Trinidad and Tobago. Kariri, as Farida said, has been doing some limited testing, but they need more resources, more reagents, and more technology in order to do a proper coverage of items that need to be tested. Because I'll give you some facts now. The World Commission, right, Customs Commission organization, had a meeting last year, and the president stated flat out, there are more fake drugs than real drugs in the world today. Right? You have to understand the extent of the problem. The global epidemic that is drug counterfeiting is worth $250 to $450 billion. That's about 2.5% of the global pharmaceutical trade, which is valued around $2 trillion.
But this forum that Kariri is having, how would it address these issues?
All right, so because we do the pharmaceutical testing and because of the growth of this counterfeit market, all right, we have put together a panel of speakers to address the areas that any country needs to firm up on to strengthen their defenses, such as we have the head of the OECS, Mr. Francis Burnett, who would be talking about the procurement and a procurement system specifically for pharmaceutical items in the Caribbean and the role of government agencies to strengthen their defenses. We have with us as well Dr. Rian Extevo, who works as a PAHO consultant, who looks at falsified and substandard products on the market and the hazards of internet pharmacies and shopping online for pharmaceutical items. Also, we have Chemistry, Food and Drug, which is looking at parallel importation, which is an area that affects Trinidad and Tobago and a lot of our pharmaceutical distributors here. And we also have Pfizer, head of global security, who would be sharing with us ways to identify counterfeited products and in many ways that their product have been counterfeited and strategies they have put in place to reduce this area of counterfeiting. And we also have another top drug house called Sanofi, who would talk about ways counterfeited products are made. So the program is structured in such a way to identify and to discuss the missing areas that Trinidad would need to focus on to strengthen our defenses in this area.
You talk about strengthening defenses in this area, but people in Trinidad and Tobago are growing concern. So this question is for both of you. How do we lessen that concern that the people have, because they will be purchasing drugs not knowing if it is false or if it is real?
But the thing is, you have to be sensible. The patients are the first guardians of health. You have to see about yourself. I mean, there's the government, there's the ministries, the NGOs, all the organizations that help to protect you, but you need to be the first line of defense. In other words, you need to buy products from recognized pharmacies that have been there, you know, had a sterling reputation. You need to buy products from companies that are known distributors and they know the source of their products. You have to read the labels carefully. You have to ask the questions. You have to make sure you know the expired dates of the products that you're buying. You need to know the brand names, the generic names. You need to know the companies who are bringing them into the country, because there's a massive suitcase trade in this country. But that has happened because people are always looking for better prices. So you can't knock parallel importation just because people are trying to bring the prices down for the patients. What has happened is that the black market, parallel importation is called the gray market. Mm-hmm. The black market is the suitcase traders who bring it in from unregistered sources or places that you don't know where they come from, you don't know how they're transported, how they're stored. So you have to be very careful and buy from bona fide sources, but most important, you have to ask questions of your pharmacist, you have to ask questions of your doctor. If you take something that you've been taking regularly and then all of a sudden it isn't working, you have a problem. It could be your body's metabolism, or it could be the tablet is not the correct strength, has no active ingredient, has too much active ingredient. For instance, Viagra is the most commonly counterfeited drug in the world today. That's prescription-wise. Non-prescription, chapstick was the most counterfeited drug last year. Well, not drug product, over the counter, right? But counterfeiting is much larger than this. It's a killer. Up to 1 million people die every year from taking counterfeit drug.
So how is Kareri? You know, we hear all of this happening, and yes, you're having a workshop, but people that not really going to help people, because you talk about as well that people need to be the guardian for themselves. But if somebody is 70 years old and they don't understand all of these things, how are we going to address it?
All right. So what Kareri has a national interest at heart. We don't want a child or the chronic disease patient to die as a result of taking counterfeit medication. And the areas that we are addressing in the conference on drug counterfeiting is going to raise the visibility in this area and sensitize the patients of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have taken a position to bring this issue at the forefront for Trinidad and Tobago for it to be addressed. The outcomes of the conference is very clear. The policies or the strategies that would be discussed would feed into the decision-making process of the regulatory agencies who have to do the enforcement. So in that way, we would decide that would be the best way for us to support this initiative and work in tandem with all of the stakeholders, the ministries and the regulatory agencies. Yes, so together we can fight the fakes for Trinidad and Tobago and the region.
Because, as you mentioned, Mr. Rahman, there are a lot of counterfeit drugs. Can you just give us an example of some of the more popular drugs that may be counterfeit?
Okay, the counterfeiters have no compassion whatsoever. They go after everything. I mean, an individual went on television recently and said that cheap drugs are not counterfeited. That's nonsense. They go after volume, they go after dollars. Unfortunately, some companies take a bigger beating than others. For example, Pfizer, because they counterfeit Viagra, they counterfeit Lipitor, right? They counterfeit Crestor, they counterfeit, every known product. They call them lifestyle diseases product, right? And life-threatening diseases product. And the point you made about the chronic disease patients, the older patient, is important. And one of the things that has to be done by the medical profession and the pharmacy profession in Trinidad is we have to follow up our patients, especially the ones who are not too literate. We have a problem with health literacy in Trinidad. But let me give you some figures as we're talking about counterfeit drugs. The University of Edinburgh did a study last year, right? And they assumed that, okay, let's say 10% of the products are counterfeit. That up to 69 million children a year die from the pneumonia because of counterfeit antibiotics, right? In Africa, 120,000 children under the age of 5 die every year because of counterfeit anti-malarial drugs. Worldwide, 450,000 people die annually from counterfeit anti-malarial products. Another 60,000 people die from anti-allergy products. Look at the problem we have in the States right now with fentanyl. 64,000 people die from opioid overdose. Most of the products purchased on the internet in the States, right? The problem with fentanyl, where 20,000 people in the US die every year, is fentanyl is so cheap, relatively, that it's now being put into tablets and packaged as Xanax. And this is used widespread in the community, and it's gotten into the schools. It only takes 2 milligrams of fentanyl to kill somebody. And I mean, $1 billion in fentanyl was sent into the US last year. That gives you a kind of idea of the problem.
Do you have any figures for Trinidad? Do you know any instances where?
Let's put it this way. We have very little data on Trinidad because nothing has been recorded. We have instances, for example, in 2013, where the then Minister of Health said they had done their homework and 20% of all the drugs in Trinidad are counterfeited.
That's 1/5.
Right.
1 in 5.
1 in 5. Now, the World Health Organization has said that Latin America and the Caribbean may have up to 30% of counterfeit drugs. And I think that is closer to the truth than the 10 to 30% range, right?
So that means Kareri has its work cut out.
It does, and we are ready to support the regulatory agencies and all of the stakeholders in this initiative and work for better Trinidad and Tobago.
Because listening to these numbers, it's scary to hear the amount of people who die. And you talk about 1 in 5.
Right.
1 in 5 drugs in Trinidad and Tobago is fake. And there is the possibility that it can kill you.
Yeah. You see, we live on the top of South America, Latin America. And Latin America is the fastest growing counterfeit region in the world, starting with Brazil and Peru.
Why is that?
And because the money is there. In poor developing countries, that's where people are most concerned, because they need to find things at reasonable prices where they can afford for their health. And that's what the criminals look after. They look where the demand is and they supply to suit.
And the Minister of Health did say if there is no demand, then there will be no need to supply. So you know that can eliminate that as well.
Right.
So before we go, I would like to get some more information about this conference again, Ms.
Okay, it's on the 26th of April, this Thursday, at the Trinidad Hilton. To register, call 299-0210. You can visit our Career website, www.career.com. It's Pharmaceutical Counterfeiting Conference 2018.
Just before we go, I need to ask one more question, Mr. Rahman.
Sure.
You talked about the regular drugstores.
Right.
How would people know?
Well, you've got to build up a relationship with your pharmacist. And, the thing is, a pile of drugstores have opened recently. We have close to 400 pharmacies in Trinidad, over 320. And you start wondering, is that too many pharmacies because there's not enough oversight done by Food and Drug and the Drug Inspectorate because they're understaffed at the present time? You see, one point I want to make before we leave is that it's not just counterfeit drugs that are the problem. Counterfeit medical devices are also a huge problem. Last year, there were 400,000 cases, right, linked to cancer from counterfeit breast implants, right? Other items that are counterfeited are surgical items, surgical mesh, diabetic strips, contact lenses. We are not immune to anything when it comes to counterfeiting. Counterfeiters have no morals, no ethics, no value. It is all about the dollar. Let me tell you why it's about the dollar. $1,000 US can give you $20,000 worth of cocaine on the market. $1,000 US can give you up to $500,000 of counterfeit drugs. So that tells you what the profit is. The pharmaceutical market in Trinidad is worth about $5 billion. 30% of that is $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money as a target, and counterfeiters target that.
And, we say all of this and people are probably getting scared.
Yeah. Well, there is reason to be scared, but what we are trying to do at Kariri and we are trying to do as pharmacists is tell people, don't close your eyes, don't bury your head in the dust, be aware. Most important, ask questions. You deserve to have answers. You have your rights, you're paying for these privileges, you should be able to ask questions of everybody in the health sector. As I said, the guardians of health is everybody, from the ministry right down to the individual patient.
And just one last thing before we go. The packaging for these counterfeit drugs,
yes, well,
is it the same as?
That's an excellent thing. I'm sorry I missed that. 84% of all the money put into counterfeit drug goes into the packaging. What you see is what you get. That's the code of the counterfeiters. So the packaging plays a critical part. They copy everything from the bottle, the label, the barcode, the holograms, to the chips that IBM are using right now in the packages.
So a lot of work for Kariri to do moving forward to ensure that, we cut this off before it gets even bigger, because 1 in 5 is a high, and people's health.
Well, it's referred to now in all circles as an epidemic, a global epidemic. And the World Health Organization and many of the trade organizations in the world are trying to get counterfeit drugs under the umbrella of a crime against humanity. That's to tell you how serious it is.
All right, well, I would like to thank you both, Ms. Farida Mangal, Marketing Officer at Kariri, and Mr. Jamil Rahman, Pharmaceutical Consultant.
Thank you.
For coming in and talking with us about the counterfeit drugs in Trinidad and Tobago and the conference that Kariri has coming up on the 26th at the Trinidad Hilton. This is Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. We take a break and come back with